Hello, I am Daisy, your hostess. We have been reading from the works of St. Thomas Aquinas from his Summa Theologica. This is part 6 and the last of the series to complete specifically his treatise on angels. By now we've become familiar with the style of inquiry of this 12th century philosopher and theologian as he presents various questions regarding angels as documented by authorities such as Plato, Aristotle, St. Augustine, Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, and biblical figures such as Isaiah, to name a few, and he uses these to confirm or deny established doctrines, which created much controversy with the Catholic Church. Oddly, Aquinas never finished his book, and despite that, eventually it became the foundation of official Catholic doctrine, whereby in 1879, Pope Leo XIII declared Aquinas' philosophy the official philosophy of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, something could be said about sources and authenticity, even noting that Aquinas was quoting from the Celestial Hierarchy written by Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite says a lot, which I did a bit of research and also shared with you the Celestial Hierarchy here on my playlist. Make sure to check it out. The point is, no one ever really knew who the mysterious author was because he wrote under the pseudonym, the pen name of Dionysius the Areopagite, who was a first century Athenian judge converted by St. Paul in the Bible. People assumed it was Dionysius who was the judge, and because of that, his works carried near apostolic authority throughout the Middle Ages. And again, if you get a chance to read the Celestial Hierarchy, you will learn that it is heavily weighed and supported by sources found in the Bible. That by the time the scholars discovered that the author was not who they thought it was already a bit too late, because despite it never being officially approved by a specific dogmatic decree, it was accepted into church tradition by the 6th and 7th centuries, cited as apostolic authority in the Lateran 649 and the Constantinople III 680 councils, and solidified by figures like St. Maximus the Confessor, and I believe by denying or retracting it, it would possibly invalidate the works of the apostles. Now, going through just this small portion of the Summa Theologica and learning that Thomas Aquinas had spent nearly a decade writing the book, and in a few minutes, after having a divine vision one evening, according to what I've researched, he never reveals what he saw. And yet, when his assistant encouraged him to finish his lengthy manuscript, he told him, quote, "I can do no more. Such things have been revealed to me that all that I have written seems to me as so much straw." End quote. And he adjured Reginald Paperno, that was his assistant, to never reveal the fact that he had told him this during his lifetime. His silence could be interpreted in many ways. Some scholars believe that probably what he saw was a profound acknowledgement of the ineffability of God, where human language and logic reached their terminal limit, or that it was not a retraction of his written works, but merely a recognition that even the most advanced theology is infinitesimal compared to the reality of the divine. But what if what he wrote, all those detailed inquiries, were just way off the mark, and the weight of that pen held such a burden that he could not make peace with his conscience because it had nothing to stand on? We'll never know, right? And then he dies a year later, at the age of 49, on March 7, 1274. Supposedly he fell ill while traveling to the Second Council of Lyon at the request of Pope Gregory X. Since we'll never know what he saw, this is not to say that angels are not real. The whole inquiry and treatise on angels was written to strongly affirm the existence of angels as an essential component of the universe's perfection. Now, the earliest specific documents on angels appeared in Hebrew scriptures and apocalyptic literature between the 5th and 2nd centuries BC. And then we have the Epic of Gilgamesh, which dated approximately 6 centuries earlier than Genesis, mentioning winged creatures, just to throw that out there, which I do have the Epic of Gilgamesh here on my playlist. You can check that out too. But what I've learned is that constructs of the mind are very real, and they're very real to its creator. And when many join in that mental construct, in agreeing and creating this construct, it becomes a challenge to refute. Even though Thomas Aquinas compared what he had written to straw, in my opinion, his works has had a strong influence on the foundation of Catholic Christianity, which has maintained an unbroken lineage of leadership dating back to the 1st century, which, according to Catholic tradition and theology, was founded by Jesus Christ, with the Pope serving as the direct successor to St. Peter. And angels, as documented in the Bible, serve as God's messengers, protectors, and executors of divine judgment, appearing nearly 300 times to guide, defend, and minister to believers. If you have been with me through this entire series, thank you. Hopefully you've enjoyed this content and were able to extract a golden nugget or two. I have. Let me know you were here. I enjoy reading your comments. I now turn the page onto the home stretch. The Summa Theologica of St. Thomas Aquinas, translated from the Latin by Fathers of the English Dominican Province. Treatise on Angels, 63 through 64. The Malice of the Angels with regard to sin, 9 articles. In the next place, we must consider how angels became evil. First of all, with regard to the evil of fault, and secondly, as to the evil of punishment. Under the first heading, there are 9 points for this consideration. 1. Can there be evil of fault in the angels? 2. What kind of sins can be in them? 3. What did the angels seek in sinning? 4. Supposing that some became evil by a sin of their own choosing, are any of them naturally evil? 5. Supposing that it is not so, could any one of them become evil in the first instant of his creation by an act of his own will? 6. Supposing that he did not, was there any interval between his creation and fall? 7. Was the highest of them who fell absolutely the highest among the angels? 8. Was the sin of the foremost angel the cause of the others sinning? 9. Did as many sin as remained steadfast? Question. Whether the evil of fault can be in the angels? Objection 1. It would seem that there can be no evil of fault in the angels. For there can be no evil except in things which are in potentiality, as is said by the philosopher Aristotle, because the subject of privation is a being in potentiality. But the angels have not being in potentiality, since they are subsisting forms. Therefore there can be no evil in them. Objection 2. Further, the angels are higher than the heavenly bodies, but philosophers say that there cannot be evil in the heavenly bodies. Therefore, neither can there be in the angels. Objection 3. Further, what is natural to a thing is always in it, but it is natural for angels to be moved by the movement of love towards God. Therefore, such love cannot be withdrawn from them, but in loving God, they do not sin. Consequently, the angels cannot sin. Objection 4. Further, desire is only of what is good or apparently good. Now, for the angels, there can be no apparent good, which is not a true good, because in them either there can be no error at all, or at least not before guilt. Therefore, the angels can desire only what is truly good. But no one sins by desiring what is truly good. Consequently, the angel does not sin by desire. On the contrary, it is said in the book of Job, chapter 4, verse 18, "In his angels he found wickedness." I answer that an angel, or any other rational creature considered in his own nature, can sin, and to whatever creature it belongs not to sin, such creature has it as a gift of grace and not from the condition of nature. The reason of this is because sinning is nothing else than a deviation from that rectitude which an act ought to have, whether we speak of sin in nature, art, or morals. That act alone, the rule of which is the very virtue of the agent, can never fall short of rectitude. Were the craftsman's hand the rule itself engraving, he could not engrave the wood otherwise than rightly. But if the rightness of engraving be judged by another rule, then the engraving may be right or faulty. Now the divine will is the sole rule of God's act, because it is not referred to any higher end. But every created will has rectitude of act so far only as it is regulated according to the divine will, to which the last end is to be referred, as every desire of a subordinate ought to be regulated by the will of his superior. For instance, the soldier's will according to the will of his commanding officer. Thus only in the divine will can there be no sin, whereas there can be sin in the will of every creature, considering the condition of its nature. Reply to objection 1. In the angels, there is no potentiality to natural existence. Yet there is potentiality in their intellective part as regard their being inclined to this or the other object. In this respect, there can be evil in them. Reply to objection 2. The heavenly bodies have none but a natural operation. Therefore, as there can be no evil of corruption in their nature, so neither can there be evil of disorder in their natural action. But besides their natural action, there is the action of free will in the angels, by reason of which evil may be in them. Reply to objection 3. It is natural for the angel to turn to God by the movement of love, according as God is the principle of his natural being. But for him to turn to God as the object of supernatural beatitude comes of infused love, from which he could be turned away by sinning. Reply to objection 4. Mortal sin occurs in two ways in the act of free will. First, when something evil is chosen, as man sins by choosing adultery, which is evil of itself. Such sin always comes of ignorance or error. Otherwise, what is evil would never be chosen as good. The adulterer errs in the particular, choosing this delight of an inordinate act as something good to be performed now, from the inclination of passion or of habit, even though he does not err in his universal judgment, but retains a right opinion in this respect. In this way there can be no sin in the angel, because there are no passions in the angels to fetter reason or intellect, as is manifest from what has been said above. Nor, again, could any habit inclining to sin precede their first sin. In another way, sin comes of free will by choosing something good in itself, but not according to proper measure or rule, so that the defect which induces sin is only on the part of the choice which is not properly regulated, but not on the part of the thing chosen, as if one were to pray without heeding the order established by the Church. Such a sin does not presuppose ignorance, but merely absence of consideration of the things which ought to be considered. In this way the angel sinned, by seeking his own good from his own free will, insubordinately to the rule of the divine will. Next question, whether only the sin of pride and envy can exist in an angel? Objection 1. It would seem that there can be other sins in the angels besides those of pride and envy, because whosoever can delight in any kind of sin can fall into the sin itself. But the demons delight even in the obscenities of carnal sins. As Augustine says, therefore there can also be carnal sins in the demons. Objection 2. Further, as pride and envy are spiritual sins, so are sloth, avarice, and anger. But spiritual sins are concerned with the spirit, just as carnal sins are with the flesh. Therefore, not only can there be pride and envy in the angels, but likewise sloth and avarice. Objection 3. According to Gregory, from the Book of Moral 31, many vices spring from pride, and in like manner from envy. But if the cause is granted, the effect follows. If therefore there can be pride and envy in the angels for the same reason, there can likewise be other vices in them. On the contrary, Augustine says that the devil is not a fornicator, nor a drunkard, nor anything of the like sort, yet he is proud and envious. I answer that sin can exist in a subject in two ways. First of all, by actual guilt, and secondly, by affection. As to guilt, all sins are in the demons, since by leading men to sin, they incur the guilt of all sins. But as to affection, only those sins can be in the demons which can belong to a spiritual nature. Now, a spiritual nature cannot be affected by such pleasures as appertain to bodies, but only by such as are in keeping with spiritual things, because nothing is affected except with regard to something which is in some way suited to its nature. But there can be no sin when anyone is incited to good of the spiritual order, unless in such affection the rule of the superior be not kept. Such is precisely the sin of pride, not to be subject to a superior when subjection is due. Consequently, the first sin of the angel can be none other than pride. Yet as consequence, it was possible for envy also to be in them, since for the appetite to tend to the desire of something involves on its part resistance to anything contrary. Now the envious man repines over the good possessed by another, inasmuch as he deems his neighbor's good to be a hindrance to his own. But another's good could not be deemed a hindrance to the good coveted by the wicked angel, except inasmuch as he coveted a singular excellence, which would cease to be singular because of the excellence of some other. So, after the sin of pride, there followed the evil of envy in the sinning angel, where he grieved over man's good, and also over the divine excellence, according as against the devil's will God makes use of man for the divine glory. Reply to objection 1. The demons do not delight in the obscenities of the sins of the flesh, as if they themselves were disposed to carnal pleasures. It is wholly through envy that they take pleasure in all sorts of human sins, so far as these are hindrances to a man's good. Reply to objection 2. Avarice, considered as a special kind of sin, is the immoderate greed of temporal possessions which serve the use of human life, and which can be estimated in value of money. To these demons are not at all inclined, any more than they are to carnal pleasures. Consequently, avarice properly so called cannot be in them, but if every immoderate greed of possessing any created good be termed avarice, in this way avarice is contained under the pride which is in the demons. Anger implies passion, and so does concupiscence. Consequently, they can only exist metaphorically in the demons. Sloth is a kind of sadness, whereby a man becomes sluggish in spiritual exercises because they weary the body, which does not apply to the demons. So it is evident that pride and envy are the only spiritual sins which can be found in demons. Yet, so that envy is not to be taken for a passion, but for a will resisting the good of another. Reply to objection 3. Under envy and pride, as found in the demons, are comprised all other sins derived from. Next question, whether the devil desired to be as God? Objection 1. It would seem that the devil did not desire to be as God, for what does not fall under apprehension does not fall under desire, because the good which is apprehended moves the appetite, whether sensible, rational, or intellectual, and sin consists only in such desire. But for any creature to be God's equal does not fall under apprehension, because it implies a contradiction. For it the finite equals the infinite, then it would itself be infinite. Therefore an angel could not desire to be as God. Objection 2. Further, the natural end can always be desired without sin, but to be likened unto God is the end to which every creature naturally tends. If, therefore, the angel desired to be as God, not by equality, but by likeness, it would seem that he did not thereby sin. Objection 3. Further, the angel was created with greater fullness of wisdom than man, but no man, save a fool, ever makes choice of being the equal of an angel, still less of God, because choice regards only things which are possible, regarding which one takes deliberation. Therefore much less did the angel sin by desiring to be as God. On the contrary, it is said in the person of the devil in Isaiah chapter 14, verse 13 and 14, I will ascend into heaven. I will be like the Most High. And Augustine says that being inflated with pride, he wished to be called God? I answer that, without doubt, the angels sinned by seeking to be as God, but this can be understood in two ways. First, by equality. Secondly, by likeness. He could not seek to be as God in the first way, because by natural knowledge he knew that this was impossible, and there was no habit preceding his first sinful act, nor any passion fettering his mind, so as to lead him to choose what was impossible by failing in some particular, as sometimes happens in ourselves. And even supposing it were possible, it would be against the natural desire, because there exists in everything the natural desire of preserving its own nature, which would not be preserved were it to be changed into another nature. Consequently, no creature of a lower order can ever covet the grade of a higher nature, just as an ass does not desire to be a horse, for were it to be so upraised, it would cease to be itself. But herein the imagination plays us false, for one is liable to think that because a man seeks to occupy a higher grade as to accidentals, which can increase without the destruction of the subject, he can also seek a higher grade of nature, to which he could not attain without ceasing to exist. Now it is quite evident that God surpasses the angels not merely in accidentals, but also in degree of nature, and one angel another. Consequently, it is impossible for one angel of lower degree to desire equality with a higher, and still more to covet equality with God. To desire to be as God according to likeness can happen in two ways. In one way, as to that likeness whereby everything is made to be likened unto God, and so if anyone desire in this way to be God-like, he commits no sin, provided that he desires such likeness in proper order, that is to say, that he may obtain it of God. But he would sin were he to desire to be like unto God even in the right way, as of his own, and not of God's power. In another way, one may desire to be like unto God in some respect which is not natural to one, as if one were to desire to create heaven and earth, which is proper to God, in which desire there would be sin. It was in this way that the devil desired to be as God, not that he desired to resemble God by being subject to no one else absolutely, for he would be desiring his own not being, since no creature can exist except by holding its existence under God. But he desired resemblance with God in this respect, by desiring, as his last end of beatitude, something which he could attain by the virtue of his own nature, turning his appetite away from supernatural beatitude, which is attained by God's grace. Or, if he desired as his last end that likeness of God, which is bestowed by grace, he sought to have it by the power of his own nature, and not from divine assistance according to God's ordering. This harmonizes with Anselm's opinion, who says that he sought that to which he would have come had he stood fast. These two views in a manner coincide, because according to both, he sought to have final beatitude of his own power, whereas this is proper to God alone. Since then, what exists of itself is the cause of what exists of another. It follows from this, furthermore, that he sought to have dominion over others, wherein he also perversely wished to be like unto God. From this we have the answer to all the objections. Next question, whether any demons are naturally wicked. Objection 1. It would seem that some demons are naturally wicked, for Porphyry says, as quoted by Augustine, there is a class of demons of crafty nature, pretending that they are gods and the souls of the dead. But to be deceitful is to be evil. Therefore, some demons are naturally wicked. Objection 2. Further, as the angels are created by God, so are men. But some men are naturally wicked, of whom it is said in the Book of Wisdom, chapter 12, verse 10, their malice is natural. Therefore, some angels may be naturally wicked. Objection 3. Further, some irrational animals have wicked dispositions by nature. Thus the fox is naturally sly, and the wolf naturally rapacious, yet they are God's creatures. Therefore, although the demons are God's creatures, they may be naturally wicked. On the contrary, Dionysius says that the demons are not naturally wicked. I answer that everything which exists, so far as it exists and has a particular nature, tends naturally towards some good, since it comes from a good principle, because the effect always reverts to its principle. Now, a particular good may happen to have some evil connected with it. Thus, fire has this evil connected with it, that it consumes other things. But with the universal good, no evil can be connected. If then there be anything whose nature is inclined towards some particular good, it can tend naturally to some evil, not as evil, but accidentally, as connected with some good. But if anything of its nature be inclined to good in general, then of its own nature it cannot be inclined to evil. Now it is manifest that every intellectual nature is inclined towards good in general, which it can apprehend, and which is the object of the will. Hence, since the demons are intellectual substances, they can in no wise have a natural inclination towards any evil whatsoever. Consequently, they cannot be naturally evil. Reply to objection 1. Augustine rebukes Porphyry for saying that the demons are naturally deceitful, himself maintaining that they are not naturally so, but of their own will. Now, the reason why Porphyry held that they are naturally deceitful was that, as he contended, demons are animals with a sensitive nature. Now, the sensitive nature is inclined towards some particular good with which evil may be connected. In this way, then, it can have a natural inclination to evil, yet only accidentally, inasmuch as evil is connected with good. Reply to objection 2. The malice of some men can be called natural, either because of custom, which is a second nature, or on account of the natural proclivity on the part of the sensitive nature to some inordinate passion, as some people are said to be naturally wrathful or lustful, but not on the part of the intellectual nature. Reply to objection 3. Brute beasts have a natural inclination in their sensitive nature towards certain particular goods, with which certain evils are connected. Thus the fox, in seeking his food, has a natural inclination to do so with a certain skill coupled with deceit. Wherefore it is not evil in the fox to be sly, since it is a natural to him, as it is not evil in the dog to be fierce, as Dionysius observes. Next question, whether the devil was wicked by the fault of his own will in the first instant of creation. Objection 1. It would seem that the devil was wicked by the fault of his own will in the first instant of his creation. For it is said of the devil in the book of John, chapter 8, verse 44, he was a murderer from the beginning. Objection 2. Further, according to Augustine, the lack of form in the creature did not precede its formation in order of time, but merely in order of nature. Now, according to him, the heaven, which is said to have been created in the beginning, signifies the angelic nature while as yet not fully formed. And when it is said that God said, "Be light made," and light was made, we are to understand the full formation of the angel by turning to the Word. Consequently, the nature of the angel was created, and light was made in the one instant. But at the same moment the light was made, it was made distinct from darkness, whereby the angels who sinned are denoted. Therefore, in the first instant of their creation, some of the angels were made blessed, and some sinned. Objection 3. Further, sin is opposed to merit, but some intellectual nature can merit in the first instant of its creation, as the soul of Christ, or also the good angels. Therefore the demons likewise could sin in the first instant of their creation. Objection 4. Further, the angelic nature is more powerful than the corporeal nature, but a corporeal thing begins to have its operation in the first instant of its creation. As fire begins to move upwards in the first instant it is produced. Therefore the angel could also have his operation in the first instant of his creation. Now this operation was either ordinate or inordinate. Inordinate, then, since he had grace, he thereby merited beatitude. But with the angels, the reward follows immediately upon merit, as was said above. Consequently, they would have become blessed at once, and so would never have sinned, which is false. It remains then that they sinned by inordinate action in their first instant. On the contrary, it is written in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 31, God saw all the things that he had made, and they were very good. But among them were also the demons. Therefore the demons were at some time good. I answer that some have maintained that demons were wicked straightway in the first instant of their creation, not by their nature, but by the sin of their own will. Because as soon as he was made, the devil refused righteousness. To this opinion, as Augustine says, if anyone subscribes, he does not agree with those Manichaean heretics who say that the devil's name is evil of itself. Since this opinion, however, is in contradiction with the authority of Scripture. For it is said of the devil under the figure of the prince of Babylon's, Isaiah 14, verse 12, How art thou fallen, O Lucifer, who didst rise in the morning? And it is said to the devil in the person of the king of Tyre, Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 13, Thou wast in the pleasure of the paradise of God. Consequently, this opinion was reasonably rejected by the masters as erroneous. Hence others have said that the angels, in the first instant of their creation, could have sinned, but did not. Yet this view also is repudiated by some because when two operations follow one upon the other, it seems impossible for each operation to terminate in the one instant. Now it is clear that the angel's sin was an act subsequent to his creation, but the term of the creative act is the angel's very being, while the term of the sinful act is the being wicked. It seems then an impossibility for the angel to have been wicked in the first instant of his existence. This argument, however, does not satisfy, for it holds only in such movements as are measured by time and take place successively. Thus, if local movement follows a change, then the change and the local movement cannot be terminated in the same instant. But if the changes are instantaneous, then all at once and in the same instant there can be a term to the first and the second change. Thus, in the same instant in which the moon is lit up by the sun, the atmosphere is lit up by the moon. Now, it is manifest that creation is instantaneous, so also is the movement of free will in the angels. For as has been already stated, they have no occasion for comparison or discursive reasoning. Consequently, there is nothing to hinder the term of creation and of free will from existing in the same instant. We must therefore reply that, on the contrary, it was impossible for the angel to sin in the first instant by an inordinate act of free will. For although a thing can begin to act in the first instant of its existence, nevertheless, that operation which begins with the existence comes of the agent from which it drew its nature, just as upward movement in fire comes of its productive cause. Therefore, if there be anything which derives its nature from a defective cause, which can be the cause of a defective action, it can, in the first instant of its existence, have a defective operation, just as the leg, which is defective from birth, through a defect in the principle of generation, begins at once to limp, but the agent which brought the angel into existence, namely God, cannot be the cause of sin. Consequently, it cannot be said that the devil was wicked in the first instant of his creation. Reply to objection 1. As Augustine says, when it is stated that the devil sins from the beginning, he is not to be thought of as sinning from the beginning wherein he was created, but from the beginning of sin. That is to say, because he never went back from his sin. Reply to objection 2. That distinction of light and darkness, whereby the sins of the demons are understood by the term darkness, must be taken as according to God's foreknowledge. Hence Augustine says that he alone could discern light and darkness, who also could foreknow, before they fell, those who would fall. Reply to objection 3. All that is in merit is from God, and consequently an angel could merit in the first instant of his creation. The same reason does not hold good of sin as has been said. Reply to objection 4. God did not distinguish between the angels before the turning away of some of them and the turning of others to himself, as Augustine says. Therefore, as all were created in grace, all merited in their first instant. But some of them at once placed an impediment to their beatitude, thereby destroying their preceding merit, and consequently they were deprived of the beatitude which they had merited. Next question, whether there was an interval between the creation and the fall of the angel? Objection 1. It would seem that there was some interval between the angel's creation and his fall, for it is said in Ezekiel chapter 28 verse 15, "Thou didst walk perfect. Thou hast walked in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day of thy creation until iniquity was found in thee." But since walking is continuous movement, it requires an interval. Therefore, there was some interval between the devil's creation and his fall. Objection 2. Further, Origen says in Hom 1 in Ezekiel that the serpent of old did not from the first walk upon his breast and belly, which refers to his sin. Therefore, the devil did not sin at once after the first instant of his creation. Objection 3. Further, capability of sinning is common alike to man and angel, but there was some delay between man's formation and his sin. Therefore, for the like reason, there was some interval between the devil's formation and his sin. Objection 4. Further, the instant wherein the devil sinned was distinct from the instant wherein he was created, but there is a middle time between every two instants. Therefore, there was an interval between his creation and his fall. On the contrary, it is said of the devil in the book of John, chapter 8, verse 44, "He stood not in the truth." And as Augustine says, we must understand this in the sense that he was in the truth, but did not remain in it. I answer that there is a twofold opinion on this point, but the more probable one, which is also more in harmony with the teachings of the saints, is that the devil sinned at once after the first instant of his creation. This must be maintained if it be held that he elicited an act of free will in the first instant of his creation, and that he was created in grace, as we have said. For since the angels attain beatitude by one meritorious act, as was said above, if the devil, created in grace, merited in the first instant, he would at once have received beatitude after that first instant, if he had not placed an impediment by sinning. If, however, it be contended that the angel was not created in grace, or that he could not elicit an act of free will in the first instant, then there is nothing to prevent some interval being interposed between his creation and fall. Reply to objection 1. Sometimes in Holy Scripture, spiritual instantaneous movements are represented by corporeal movements which are measured by time. In this way, by walking, we are to understand the movement of free will tending towards good. Reply to objection 2. Origen says, "The serpent of old did not from the first walk upon his breast and belly, because of the first instant in which he was not wicked." Reply to objection 3. An angel has an inflexible free will after once choosing. Consequently, if after the first instant in which he had a natural movement to good, he had not at once placed a barrier to beatitude, he would have been confirmed in good. It is not so with man, and therefore the argument does not hold good. Reply to objection 4. It is true to say that there is a middle time between every two instants, so far as time is continuous, as it is proved in Physics 6, text 2, but in the angels, who are not subject to the heavenly movement, which is primarily measured by continuous time, time is taken to mean the succession of their mental acts or of their affections. So the first instant in the angels is understood to respond to the operation of the angelic mind, whereby it introspects itself by its evening knowledge, because on the first day evening is mentioned, but not morning. This operation was good in them all. From such operations, some of them were converted to the praise of the word by their morning knowledge, while others, absorbed in themselves, became night, swelling up with pride, as Augustine says. Hence the first act was common to them all, but in their second they were separated. Consequently, they were all of them good in the first instant, but in the second the good were set apart from the wicked. Next question, whether the highest angel among those who sinned was the highest of all. Objection 1. It would seem that the highest among the angels who sinned was not the highest of all. For it is stated in Ezekiel chapter 28 verse 14, "Thou wast a cherub stretched out and protecting, and I set thee in the holy mountain of God." Now the order of the cherubim is under the order of the seraphim, as Dionysius says in the Celestial Hierarchy 6 and 7. Therefore, the highest angel among those who sinned was not the highest of all. Objection 2. Further, God made intellectual nature in order that it might attain to beatitude. If therefore the highest of the angels sinned, it follows that the divine ordinance was frustrated in the noblest creature, which is unfitting. Objection 3. Further, the more a subject is inclined towards anything, so much the less can it fall away from it. But the higher an angel is, so much the more is he inclined towards God. Therefore, so much the less can he turn away from God by sinning. And so it seems that the angel who sinned was not the highest of all, but one of the lower angels. On the contrary, Gregory in Homilia in Evangelia 34 says that the chief angel who sinned, being set over all the host of angels, surpassed them in brightness, and was by comparison the most illustrious among them. I answer that two things have to be considered in sin, namely the proneness to sin and the motive for sinning. If then, in the angels we consider the proneness to sin, it seems that the higher angels were less likely to sin than the lower. On this account, Damascene says that the highest of those who sinned was set over the terrestrial order. This opinion seems to agree with the view of the Platonists, which Augustine quotes, for they said that all the gods were good, whereas some of the demons were good and some bad, naming as gods the intellectual substances which are above the lunar sphere, and calling by the name of demons the intellectual substances which are beneath it, yet higher than men in the order of nature. Nor is this opinion to be rejected as contrary to faith, because the whole corporeal creation is governed by God through the angels, as Augustine says. Consequently, there is nothing to prevent us from saying that the lower angels were divinely set aside for presiding over the lower bodies, the higher over the higher bodies, and the highest to stand before God. And in this sense, Damascene says that they who fell were of the lower grade of angels, yet in that order some of them remained good. But if the motive for sinning be considered, we find that it existed in the higher angels more than in the lower. For as has been said, the demons' sin was pride, and the motive of pride is excellence, which was greater in the higher spirits. Hence Gregory says that he who sinned was the very highest of all. This seems to be the more probable view, because the angels' sin did not come of any proneness, but of free choice alone. Consequently, that argument seems to have the more weight, which is drawn from the motive in sinning. Yet this must not be prejudicial to the other view, because there might be some motive for sinning in him also who was the chief of the lower angels. Reply to objection 1. Cherubim is interpreted fullness of knowledge, while seraphim means those who are on fire, or who set on fire. Consequently, cherubim is derived from knowledge, which is compatible with mortal sin. But seraphim is derived from the heat of charity, which is incompatible with mortal sin. Therefore, the first angel who sinned is called not a seraph, but a cherub. Reply to objection 2. The divine intention is not frustrated either in those who sin or in those who are saved. For God knows beforehand the end of both, and he procures glory from both, saving these of his goodness and punishing those of his justice. But the intellectual creature, when it sins, falls away from its due end. Nor is this unfitting in any exalted creature, because the intellectual creature was so made by God that it lies within its own will to act for its end. Reply to objection 3. However great was the inclination towards good in the highest angel, there was no necessity imposed upon him. Consequently, it was in his power not to follow it. Next question, whether the sin of the highest angel was the cause of the others sinning. Objection 1. It would seem that the sin of the highest angel was not the cause of the others sinning, for the cause precedes the effect. But, as Damascene observes, they all sinned at one time. Therefore, the sin of one was not the cause of the others sinning. Objection 2. Further, an angel's first sin can only be pride, as was shown above. But pride seeks excellence. Now it is more contrary to excellence for anyone to be subject to an inferior than to a superior, and so it does not appear that the angels sin by desiring to be subject to a higher angel rather than God. Yet the sin of one angel would have been the cause of the others sinning, if he had induced them to be his subjects. Therefore, it does not appear that the sin of the highest angel was the cause of the others sinning. Objection 3. Further, it is greater sin to wish to be subject to another against God than to wish to be over another against God, because there is less motive for sinning. If therefore the sin of the foremost angel was the cause of the others sinning, in that he induced them to subject themselves to him, then the lower angels would have sinned more deeply than the highest one, which is contrary to a gloss on the book of Psalms 103, verse 26. This dragon which thou hast formed, he who was the more excellent than the rest in nature, became the greater in malice. Therefore the sin of the highest angel was not the cause of the others sinning. On the contrary, it is said in the book of Apocalypse, chapter 12, verse 4, that the dragon drew with him the third part of the stars of heaven. I answer that. The sin of the highest angel was the cause of the others sinning, not as compelling them, but as inducing them by a kind of exhortation. A token thereof appears in this, that all the demons are subjects of that highest one, as is evident from our Lord's words. Go, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, which was prepared for the devil and his angels, from the book of Matthew, chapter 25, verse 41. For the order of divine justice exacts that whosoever consents to another evil suggestion shall be subjected to him in his punishment, according to the second book of Peter, chapter 2, verse 19. By whom a man is overcome, of the same also he is the slave. Reply to objection 1. Although the demons all sinned in the one instant, yet the sin of one could be the cause of the rest sinning. For the angel needs no delay of time for choice, exhortation, or consent, as man, who requires deliberation in order to choose and consent, and vocal speech in order to exhort, both of which are the work of time. And it is evident that even man begins to speak in the very instant when he takes thought, and in the last instant of speech, another who watches his meaning can assent to what is said, as is especially evident with regard to primary concepts, which everyone accepts directly they are heard. Taking away then the time for speech and deliberation which is required in us, in the same instant in which the highest angel expressed his affection by intelligible speech, it was possible for the others to consent thereto. Reply to objection 2. Other things being equal, the proud would rather be subject to a superior than to an inferior, yet he chooses rather to be subject to an inferior than to a superior, if he can procure an advantage under an inferior which he cannot under a superior. Consequently, it was not against the demon's pride for them to wish to serve an inferior by yielding to his rule, for they wanted to have him as their prince and leader, so that they might attain their ultimate beatitude of their own natural powers, especially because in the order of nature they were even then subject to the highest angel. Reply to objection 3. As was observed above, an angel has nothing in him to retard his action, and with his whole might he is moved to whatsoever he is moved, be it good or bad. Consequently, since the highest angel had greater natural energy than the lower angels, he fell into sin with intenser energy, and therefore he became the greater in malice. Next question, whether those who sinned were as many as those who remained firm? Objection 1. It would seem that more angels sinned than stood firm, for as the philosopher Aristotle says in Ethics 2:6, evil is in many, but good is in few. Objection 2. Further, justice and sin are to be found in the same way in men and in angels, but there are more wicked men to be found than good, according to Ecclesiastic 1, verse 15. The number of fools is infinite. Therefore, for the same reason, it is so with the angels. Objection 3. Further, the angels are distinguished according to persons and orders. Therefore, if more angelic persons stood firm, it would appear that those who sinned were not from all the orders. On the contrary, it is said from the 4th book of Kings, chapter 6, verse 16, there are more with us than with them, which is expounded of the good angels who are with us to aid us, and the wicked spirits who are our foes. I answer that more angels stood firm than sinned, because sin is contrary to the natural inclination, while that which is against the natural order happens with less frequency, for nature procures its effects either always, or more often than not. Reply to objection 1. The philosopher Aristotle is speaking with regard to men, in whom evil comes to pass from seeking after sensible pleasures, which are known to most men, and from forsaking the good dictated by reason, which good is known to the few. In the angels there's only an intellectual nature, hence the argument does not hold. And from this we have the answer to the second difficulty. Reply to objection 3. According to those who hold that the chief devil belonged to the lower order of the angels who are set over earthly affairs, it is evident that some of every order did not fall, but only those of the lowest order. According to those who maintain that the chief devil was of the highest order, it is probable that some fell of every order, just as men are taken up into every order to supply for the angelic ruin. In this view, the liberty of free will is more established, which in every degree of creature can be turned to evil. In the sacred scripture, however, the names of some orders, as of seraphim and thrones, are not attributed to demons, since they are derived from the ardor of love and from God's indwelling, which are not consistent with mortal sin. Yet the names of cherubim, powers, and principalities are attributed to them, because these names are derived from knowledge and from power, which can be common to both good and bad. The punishment of the demons. 4 articles. It now remains as a sequel to deal with the punishment of the demons, under which heading there are 4 points of inquiry. 1. Of their darkness of intellect. 2. Of their obstinacy of will. 3. Of their grief. 4. Of their place of punishment. Whether the demon's intellect is darkened by privation of the knowledge of all truth. Objection 1. It would seem that the demon's intellect is darkened by being deprived of the knowledge of all truth. For if they knew any truth at all, they would most of all know themselves, which is to know separated substances, but this is not in keeping with their unhappiness. For this seems to belong to great happiness, insomuch as that some writers have assigned a man's last happiness, the knowledge of the separated substances. Therefore the demons are deprived of all knowledge of truth. Objection 2. Further, what is most manifest in its nature seems to be specially manifested to the angels, whether good or bad. That the same is not manifest with regard to ourselves comes from the weakness of our intellect, which draws its knowledge from phantasms, as it comes from the weakness of its eye, that the owl cannot behold the light of the sun. But the demons cannot know God, who is manifest of himself, because he is the sovereign truth. And this is because they are not clean of heart, whereby alone can God be seen. Therefore, neither can they know other things. Objection 3. Further, according to Augustine, the proper knowledge of the angels is twofold, namely morning and evening. But the demons have no morning knowledge, because they do not see things in the Word, nor have they the evening knowledge, because this evening knowledge refers to the things known to the Creator's praise. Hence, after evening comes morning, as per Genesis 1. Therefore, the demons can have no knowledge of things. Objection 4. Further, the angels at their creation knew the mystery of the kingdom of God, as Augustine says, but the demons are deprived of such knowledge, for if they had known it, they would never have crucified the Lord of glory, as said in the first book of Corinthians chapter 2 verse 8. Therefore, for the same reason, they are deprived of all other knowledge of truth. Objection 5. Further, whatever truth anyone knows is known either naturally, as we know first principles, or by deriving it from someone else, as we know by learning, or by long experience, as the things we learn by discovery. Now, the demons cannot know the truth by their own nature, because, as Augustine says, the good angels are separated from them as light is from darkness, and every manifestation is made through light, as is said in the book of Ephesians chapter 5 verse 13. In like manner, they cannot learn by revelation, nor by learning from the good angels, because there is no fellowship of light with darkness. What fellowship hath? In the second book of Corinthians chapter 6 verse 14. Nor can they learn by long experience, because experience comes of the senses. Consequently, there is no knowledge of truth in them. On the contrary, Dionysius says that certain gifts were bestowed upon the demons, which we say have not been changed at all, but remain entire and most brilliant. Now, the knowledge of truth stands among those natural gifts. Consequently, there is some knowledge of truth in them. I answer that the knowledge of truth is twofold, one which comes of nature and one which comes of grace. The knowledge which comes of grace is likewise twofold. The first is purely speculative, as when divine secrets are imparted to an individual. The other is effective and produces love for God, which knowledge properly belongs to the gift of wisdom. Of these three kinds of knowledge, the first was neither taken away nor lessened in the demons, for it follows from the very nature of the angel, who according to his nature is an intellect or mind, since on account of the simplicity of his substance nothing can be withdrawn from his nature, so as to punish him by subtracting from his natural powers, as a man is punished by being deprived of a hand or a foot or of something else. Therefore Dionysius says that the natural gifts remain entire in them. Consequently, their natural knowledge was not diminished. The second kind of knowledge, however, which comes of grace and consists in speculation, has not been utterly taken away from them, but lessened. Because of these divine secrets, only so much is revealed to them as is necessary, and that is done either by means of the angels or through some temporal workings of divine power, as Augustine says, but not in the same degree as to the holy angels, to whom many more things are revealed, and more fully in the Word himself. But of the third knowledge, as likewise of charity, they are utterly deprived. Reply to objection 1. Happiness consists in self-application to something higher. The separated substances are above us in the order of nature. Hence, man can have happiness of a kind by knowing the separated substances, although his perfect happiness consists in knowing the first substance, namely God. But it is quite natural for one separate substance to know another, as it is natural for us to know sensible natures. Hence, as man's happiness does not consist in knowing sensible natures, so neither does the angel's happiness consist in knowing separated substance. Reply to objection 2. What is most manifest in its nature is hidden from us by its surpassing the bounds of our intellect, and not merely because our intellect draws knowledge from phantasms. Now the divine substance surpasses the proportion not only of human intellect, but even of the angelic. Consequently, not even an angel can of his own nature know God's substance, yet on account of the perfection of his intellect he can, of his nature, have a higher knowledge of God than man can have. Such knowledge of God remains also in the demons. Although they do not possess the purity which comes with grace, nevertheless they have purity of nature, and this suffices for the knowledge of God which belongs to them from their nature. Reply to Objection 3. The creature is darkness in comparison with the excellence of the divine light, and therefore the creature's knowledge in its own nature is called evening knowledge, for the evening is akin to darkness, yet it possesses some light. But when the light fails utterly, then it is night. So then the knowledge of things in their own nature, when referred to the praise of the Creator, as it is in the good angels, has nothing of the divine light, and can be called evening knowledge. But if it be not referred to God, as is the case with the demons, it is not called evening, but nocturnal knowledge. Accordingly, we read in Genesis chapter 1, verse 5, that the darkness which God separated from the light, he called night. Reply to Objection 4. All the angels had some knowledge from the very beginning respecting the mystery of God's kingdom, which found its completion in Christ, and most of all from the moment when they were beatified by the vision of the Word, which vision the demons never had. Yet all the angels did not fully and equally apprehend it. Hence the demons much less fully understood the mystery of the incarnation when Christ was in the world. For as Augustine observes, it was not manifested to them as it was to the holy angels, who enjoy a participated eternity of the Word, but it was made known by some temporal effects, so as to strike terror into them. For had they fully and certainly known that he was the Son of God, and the effect of his passion, they would never have procured the crucifixion of the Lord of glory. Reply to Objection 5. The demons know a truth in three ways. First of all, by the subtlety of their nature, for although they are darkened by privation of the light of grace, yet they are enlightened by the light of their intellectual nature. Secondly, by revelation from the holy angels, for while not agreeing with them in conformity of will, they do agree, nevertheless, by their likeness of intellectual nature, according to which they can accept what is manifested by others. Thirdly, they know by long experience, not as deriving it from the senses, but when the similitude of their innate intelligible species is completed in individual things, they know some things as present, which they previously did not know would come to pass, as we said when dealing with the knowledge of the angels. Question: whether the will of the demons is obstinate in evil? Objection 1. It would seem that the will of the demons is not obstinate in evil. For liberty of will belongs to the nature of an intellectual being, which nature remains in the demons, as we said above. But liberty of will is directly and firstly ordained to good rather than to evil. Therefore the demon's will is not so obstinate in evil as not to be able to return to what is good. Objection 2. Further, since God's mercy is infinite, it is greater than the demon's malice, which is finite. But no one returns from the malice of sin to the goodness of justice save through God's mercy. Therefore, the demons can likewise return from their state of malice to the state of justice. Objection 3. Further, if the demons have a will obstinate in evil, then their will would be especially obstinate in the sin whereby they fell. But that sin, namely pride, is in them no longer, because the motive for the sin no longer endures, namely excellence. Therefore, the demon is not obstinate in malice. Objection 4. Further, Gregory says in Moral 4 that man can be reinstated by another, since he fell through another, but as was observed already, the lower demons fell through the highest one, therefore their fall can be repaired by another. Consequently, they are not obstinate in malice. Objection 5. Further, whoever is obstinate in malice never performs any good work, but the demon performs some good works, for he confesses the truth, saying to Christ, I know who thou art, the Holy One of God. in the book of Mark, chapter 1, verse 24. The demons also believe and tremble in Jeremiah, chapter 2, verse 19. And Dionysius observes that they desire what is good and best, which is to be, to live, to understand. Therefore, they are not obstinate in malice. On the contrary, it is said in Psalms 73, verse 23, the pride of them that hate thee ascendeth continually. And this is understood of the demons. Therefore, they remain ever obstinate in their malice. I answer that. It was Origen's opinion from Petty Archon 1:6 that every will of the creature can by reason of free will be inclined to good and evil, with the exception of the soul of Christ on account of the union of the Word. Such a statement deprives angels and saints of true beatitude, because everlasting stability is of the very nature of true beatitude. Hence is termed life everlasting. It is also contrary to the authority of sacred scripture, which declares that demons and wicked men shall be sent into everlasting punishment, and the good brought into everlasting life. Consequently, such an opinion must be considered erroneous, while according to Catholic faith, it must be held firmly both that the will of the good angels is confirmed in good, and that the will of the demon is obstinate in evil. We must seek for the cause of this obstinacy, not in the gravity of the sin, but in the condition of their nature or state. For as Damascene says, death is to men what the fall is to the angels. Now it is clear that all the mortal sins of men, grave or less grave, are pardonable before death, whereas after death they are without remission and endure forever. To find the cause, then, of this obstinacy, it must be borne in mind that the appetitive power is in all things proportioned to the apprehensive, whereby it is moved as the movable by its mover. For the sensitive appetite seeks a particular good, while the will seeks the universal good, as was said above. As also the sense apprehends the particular objects, while the intellect considers universals. Now the angel's apprehension differs from man's in this respect, that the angel by his intellect apprehends immovably, as we apprehend immovably first principles, which are the object of the habit of intelligence, whereas man by his reason apprehends immovably, passing from one consideration to another, and having the way open by which he may proceed to either of two opposites. Consequently, man's will adheres to a thing movably, and with the power of forsaking it and of clinging to the opposite, whereas the angel's will adheres fixedly and immovably. Therefore, if his will be considered before its adhesion, it can freely adhere either to this or to its opposite, namely in such things as he does not will naturally. But after he has once adhered, he clings immovably. So it is customary to say that man's free will is flexible to the opposite both before and after choice. But the angel's free will is flexible either opposite before the choice, but not after. Therefore, the good angels who adhered to justice were confirmed therein, whereas the wicked ones, sinning, are obstinate in sin. Later on, we shall treat of the obstinacy of men who are damned. Reply to objection 1. The good and wicked angels have free will, but according to the manner and condition of their state, as has been said. Reply to objection 2. God's mercy delivers from sin those who repent, but such as are not capable of repenting cling immovably to sin and are not delivered by the divine mercy. Reply to objection 3. The devil's first sin still remains in him according to desire, although not as to his believing that he can obtain what he desired. Even so, if a man were to believe that he can commit murder and wills to commit it, and afterwards the power is taken from him, nevertheless the will to murder can stay with him, so that he had done it, or still would do it if he could. Reply to objection 4. The fact that man sinned from another's suggestion is not the whole cause of man's sin being pardonable. Consequently, the argument does not hold good. Reply to objection 5. A demon's act is twofold. One comes of deliberate will, and this is properly called his own act. Such an act on the demon's part is always wicked, because although at times he does something good, yet he does not do it well. And when he tells the truth in order to deceive, and when he believes and confesses, yet not willingly, but compelled by the evidence of things. Another kind of act is natural to the demon. This can be good and bears witness to the goodness of nature, yet he abuses even such good acts to evil purpose. Next question, whether there is sorrow in the demons? Objection 1. It would seem that there is no sorrow in the demons. For since sorrow and joy are opposites, they cannot be together in the same subject. But there is joy in the demons, for Augustine, writing against the Malice, says the devil has power over them who despise God's commandments, and he rejoices over this sinister power. Therefore there is no sorrow in the demons. Objection 2. Further, sorrow is the cause of fear. For those things cause fear while they are future, which cause sorrow when they are present. But there is no fear in the demons, according to Job, chapter 41, verse 24, who was made to fear no one. Therefore there is no grief in the demons. Objection 3. Further, it is a good thing to be sorry for evil, but the demons can do no good action. Therefore they cannot be sorry, at least for the evil of sin, which applies to the worm of conscience. On the contrary, the demon's sin is greater than man's sin, but man is punished with sorrow on account of the pleasure taken in sin, according to Apocalypse chapter 18, verse 7. As much as she hath glorified herself and lived in delicacies, so much torment and sorrow give ye to her. Consequently, much more is the devil punished with the grief of sorrow, because he especially glorified himself. I answer that fear, sorrow, joy, and the like, so far as they are passions, cannot exist in the demons, for thus they are proper to the sensitive appetite, which is a power in a corporeal organ. According, however, as they denote simple acts of the will, they can be in the demons. And it must be said that there is sorrow in them, because sorrow, as denoting a simple act of the will, is nothing else than the resistance of the will to what is, or to what is not. Now it is evident that the demons would wish many things not to be, which are, and other things to be, which are not. For out of envy they would wish others to be damned who are saved. Consequently, sorrow must be said to exist in them, and especially because it is of the very notion of punishment for it to be repugnant to the will. Moreover, they are deprived of happiness, which they desire naturally, and their wicked will is curbed in many respects. Reply to Objection 1. Joy and sorrow about the same thing are opposites, but not about different things. Hence there is nothing to hinder a man from being sorry for one thing and joyful for another, especially so far as sorrow and joy imply simple acts of the will, because not merely in different things, but even in one and the same thing, there can be something that we will and something that we will not. Reply to Objection 2. As there is sorrow in the demons over present evil, so also there is fear of future evil. Now when it is said, he was made to fear no one, this is to be understood of the fear of God, which restrains from sin. For it is written elsewhere that the devils believe and tremble, in the book of James chapter 2 verse 19. Reply to Objection 3. To be sorry for the evil of sin on account of the sin bears witness to the goodness of the will, to which the evil of sin is opposed. But to be sorry for the evil of punishment, for the evil of sin on account of the punishment, bears witness to the goodness of nature, to which the evil of punishment is opposed. Hence Augustine says that sorrow for good lost by punishment is the witness to a good nature. Consequently, since the demon has a perverse and obstinate will, he is not sorry for the evil of sin. Next question. Whether our atmosphere is the demon's place of punishment? Objection 1. It would seem that this atmosphere is not the demon's place of punishment, for a demon is a spiritual nature, but a spiritual nature is not affected by place. Therefore, there is no place of punishment for demons. Objection 2. Further, man's sin is not graver than the demons, but man's place of punishment is hell. Much more, therefore, is it the demon's place of punishment, and consequently not the darksome atmosphere. Objection 3. Further, the demons are punished with the pain of fire, but there is no fire in the darksome atmosphere. Therefore, the darksome atmosphere is not the place of punishment for the demons. On the contrary, Augustine says that the darksome atmosphere is as a prison to the demons until the judgment day. I answer that the angels, in their own nature, stand midway between God and men. Now, the order of divine providence so disposes that it procures the welfare of the inferior orders through the superior. But man's welfare is disposed by divine providence in two ways. First of all, directly, when a man is brought unto good and withheld from evil, and this is fittingly done through the good angels. In another way, indirectly, as when anyone assailed is exercised by fighting against the opposition. It was fitting for this procuring of man's welfare to be brought about through the wicked spirits, lest they should cease to be of service in the natural order. Consequently, a twofold place of punishment is due to the demons. One, by reason of their sin, and this is hell, and another, in order that they may tempt men, and thus the darksome atmosphere is their due place of punishment. Now, the procuring of man's salvation is prolonged even to the judgment day. Consequently, the ministry of the angels and wrestling with demons endure until then. Hence, until then, the good angels are sent to us here, and the demons are in this dark atmosphere for our trial. Although some of them are even now in hell, to torment those whom they have led astray, just as some of the good angels are with the holy souls in heaven. But after the judgment day, all the wicked, both men and angels, will be in hell, and the good in heaven. Reply to objection 1. A place is not penal to angel or soul as if affecting the nature by changing it, but as affecting the will by saddening it, because the angel or the soul apprehends that it is in a place not agreeable to its will. Reply to objection 2. One soul is not set over another in the order of nature, as the demons are over men in the order of nature. Consequently, there is no parallel. Reply to objection 3. Some have maintained that the pain of sense for demons and souls is postponed until the judgment day, and that the beatitude of the saints is likewise postponed until the judgment day. But this is erroneous and contrary to the teaching of the apostle from the second book of Corinthians 5, verse 1. If our earthly house of this habitation be dissolved, we have a house in heaven. Others, again, while not admitting the same of souls, admit it as to demons, but it is better to say that the same judgment is passed upon wicked souls and wicked angels, even as on good souls and good angels. Consequently, it must be said that, although a heavenly place belongs to the glory of the angels, yet their glory is not lessened by their coming to us, for they consider that place to be their own. In the same way as we say that the bishop's honor is not lessened while he is not actually sitting on his throne. In like manner, it must be said that, although the demons are not actually bound within the fire of hell while they are in this dark atmosphere, nevertheless, their punishment is nonetheless, because they know that such confinement is their due. Hence, it is said in a gloss upon the book of James, chapter 3, verse 6, they carry fire of hell with them wherever they go. Nor is this contrary to what is said in the book of Luke, chapter 8, verse 31. They besought the Lord not to cast them into the abyss, for they asked for this, deeming it to be a punishment for them to be cast out of a place where they could injure men. Hence, it is stated, they besought him that he would not expel them out of the country. From the book of Mark, chapter 5, verse 10. We have now reached the end of the section titled Treatise on the Angels by St. Thomas Aquinas from his book, the Summa Theologica, which was translated by fathers of the English Dominican province from the Latin to English. I hope that you have enjoyed this content. Please do hit the like button. Let me know you are here. Leave me a comment and share this with like-minded people, family and friends. And yes, subscribe to the channel if there's anything that you'd like to have read here. And if it's within my power to do so, I would love to do that for you. Be blessed.